Hello to everyone who's just starting to join us now. I'm going to give us a couple of minutes before we get started to allow people some more time to join. Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get us started with some housekeeping and a welcome, and more people shall be joining us shortly. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're very happy to have you here today. So this webinar is an overview of the W+ label for verified carbon units, or VCUs. In a moment, I will be joined by my other colleagues who will introduce themselves once we get to our introduction slide. But before I kick us off, I have a couple of housekeeping items to cover for this webinar. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded. So the recording will be available on the Verra website after the webinar is over. And it will also be sent via an email link to anybody who registered for this webinar. So if you need to refer back to the recording, you should have it in your inboxes. The second item is about the Q&A function. So there will be a Q&A session at the end. On your Zoom menu, you should see a Q&A panel. You can open that Q&A panel and type in your questions there throughout the webinar whenever you like. And then at the end of the session, we will be answering all questions in that format. There is also a chat box enabled. Feel free to use that to introduce yourselves, so we can get an idea of who's joining us and from where. That's always really nice to have. However, please do remember to put questions in the Q&A so that we can see them there, and that's where we will go to see all the questions at the end and answer them in the Q&A session. So finally, this webinar should have an overall runtime of about 60 minutes, take it or leave a little bit. So yeah, about 45 minutes of presentation, or less if we'd like to give you back more of your day, and then about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So that is the introductory information. So let's move us along. The objectives of today's webinar are to provide an overview of the W+ label for VCUs, what they are, and how to attain them. So the eligibility process and the procedures to obtain them. So, and also, as I have mentioned, we'll be answering some questions. If people have questions about the process or about any of the information we present at the end, we're happy to do so. So quickly, let's introduce ourselves, the people that you'll be seeing on screen today. There is myself, I'm Nicole Shermer, and I am the manager of VCS program development at Verra, working on the development of the VCS program and on VCU labels. I'll let Justin introduce himself, and then we'll have Jeanette.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Justin Wheeler, Senior Director, VCS Program Development. So my teams are responsible for updates to the VCS program, as well as the methodologies within the program. Over to you, Jeanette.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining today. Really pleased to be here and honored to be with the Verra team doing this webinar. I'm the founder and executive director of WOCON. We're about 20 years old now, and we are the creator of the W+ standard, which you're going to hear much more about.
Thanks, Jeanette. Okay, I'll give everyone a quick overview of the agenda and the topics that we're going to cover today, but I know we all just want to jump into it, so I won't spend too much time here. We'll start with a little bit of background on VCU labels and what they are, and what certification labels are. Then we'll talk about the background on the W+ program, or W+ standard, and the W+ label itself. Then we'll get a bit more specific. We'll go into the eligibility criteria and the process for applying W+ labels to VCUs. And we'll wrap up with that Q&A. Okay, I think it is, yes, over to Justin to give us this introduction to VCU labels.
Thanks, Nicole. So labels for verified carbon units are basically a way of indicating additional information about the VCU. We have two types of labels. We have market labels and certification labels. Market labels would be like reduction or removals, or CORSIA labels. So they indicate some information that a particular segment of the market might be interested in. And then certification labels indicate that the project and the associated VCU have been certified by some additional certification body. So in this case, we'll be talking about W+ as a certification label. So it indicates that the project has been fully certified and qualified under the VCS, but then also under another program, in this case, WCAN and the W+ standard. The label process, so labels are identified when you look on the registry at any VCU. You can see the additional characteristics of the VCUs in the labels there, and they're just listed sequentially on the registry. And for projects that want to request the labels, we'll talk about that a little more later, but that's also through the registry interface that the projects request the labels once they've supplied whatever information they need to confirm their eligibility for that label. So I think it's back over to you, Nicole, for a bit more detail.
Thanks, Justin. Okay, now I will give an overview of the W+ label. So the W+ label signals that a VCS project conforms with the requirements of the W+ standard. And W+ is a certification framework developed by WOCAN, Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resource Management. You'll definitely hear more about WOCAN and W+ from Jeanette in a moment here. But the W+ standard basically provides metrics to quantify, verify, and monetize women's empowerment results within projects and supply chains. And so the W+ label for VCU indicates that a project is both a VCS project and a project that conforms with the W+ standard. So the W+ label for VCUs are active and available on the Verra registry for anyone, anytime who wants to follow this process. And if you follow each program's respective registration, validation, and verification requirements, your project is eligible to receive W+ labeled VCUs. And so the reason we're having this webinar today and talking to you all about this topic is because we recently released an updated guidance document for those wishing to obtain W+ labels for their VCS projects. It's called the W+ label guidance document. We released it in late June, and it essentially provides all the information that you should need to know about registering your projects under both programs, or demonstrating verification under both programs, and then getting the label to your issued VCUs. Okay, I'm handing it back to Jeanette now to talk a little bit more about the value of the W+ label, and then also to give a little bit more background on W+ at WOCAN and the W+ standard. Over to you, Jeanette. Thanks,
Nicole. So WOCAN created the W+ standard about 10 years ago. And so WOCAN is a not-for-profit organization that has expertise in gender mainstreaming within carbon and climate-related projects around the world. So we designed this in part to scale up the activities of such projects and to improve their way of implementing projects in terms of producing gender equality and women's empowerment outcomes. So, and we also did this in a way that should incentivize and provide benefits to project developers responsible for such projects. So we did this very much with project developers in mind. At the time we developed the standard, we actually had experts who were experts in carbon standards. So we used carbon standards as a kind of a architecture to come up with the W+ standard. We should state, though, that the W+ standard is agnostic. It is not only applied to carbon projects. It has been applied to many international development projects that have a women's empowerment perspective, that don't care at all about measuring carbon or having climate outcomes. So we should state that right up front. But in this case here, we're talking about it in relation to VCS carbon projects. So it really, it really provides the metrics, but those metrics for measurement can also see the value of that for the design framework for integrating women's empowerment activities into these projects. So we've worked with agriculture, natural resource management organizations for decades. And we're fully aware that in many cases, such projects don't exactly know what to do, what types of activities they should be implementing that would have this desired outcome. So we think that the W+ standard provides that kind of design framework. It provides a financial incentive in the ways that, again, because it's a market-based approach as the carbon, using voluntary carbon market approach to bring, the idea here is we're trying to find a way to bring higher premium prices onto the price of a high quality carbon credit in a way that rewards the project developers who are able to implement and receive such certification. So ideally, this means that the price of the added price that will be received by project developers will be sufficient to cover additional activities for women's empowerment, the cost of measurement and verification, and ideally, and then you'll see as well, one thing that's specific about the W+ standard is it requires a 20% benefit sharing approach with women's organizations in that project community. This is something that's a little bit unique, I think, to the W+, but this was meeting WOCON's mission, which is to provide also new financial revenue streams to these women's organizations that are most often very much struggling at the grassroots level. So the idea is that this is additional financial incentive to the project developer, but that there are others who benefit along this supply chain as well, and including the very critical aspect of the local women's organizations. So you're hearing a lot, and you know as well as I do, that there's a lot of noise these days about the need for high integrity social or high integrity carbon projects that have social impacts and benefits to the communities. And I think this way of sharing the revenue gained from the sale of credits with members of the community is very clearly what we're hearing many buyers are looking for. And I think this is a perfectly inbuilt way to achieve this. And also I want to say here that this is a way to avoid the headline risk of pink washing. This is, we all know greenwashing, and this is the next thing. This is something that those of us who work in the field of gender equality are very familiar with, the way that projects will give very marginal attention to women's empowerment and gender equality by simply putting very minimal statements into either a project proposal or report. This is rigorous. This is getting beyond that. We are looking for outcomes. We are measuring outcomes, and it has to be seen by the evidence in the field that's done, that the W+ standard assures. And it's not based on just self-reporting. We have to have, there's a means of verification, and it's as similar to what you see in a carbon project. We need to see what's going on at the field level, and we also have a process of third-party independent verification that is done not by the usual VVBs doing carbon verification, but by verifiers who can measure social impact and have enough knowledge of gender equality, women's empowerment to make adequate verification statements. So I think for the buyers of the VCUs, as I was saying, we are also hearing more and more interest amongst the buyers for what they're calling what's called gender co-benefits. This is, I think, for many buyers, a convenient way to check two boxes that they have internally within their companies for not only their net zero goals, but also their SDG 5 goals. SDG 5 is for gender equality, women's empowerment. It allows it in a simple way, straightforward way, the opportunity to do both at the same time. That's finding a lot of interest amongst the buyers that we're talking with. As well as the companies that are buying carbon credits. There's also the ESG investors who have been looking for, in some cases, this way to measure and quantify social dimension, the S out of the ESG, and not finding any other methodology that enabled them to do such a thing in a rigorous way that allows that kind of reporting. So we're hearing that as well. And as I mentioned before, there are a lot of buyers actually who are extremely interested in this aspect of the ability to share benefits with women's groups in the community in a way that's transparent and trustworthy, they can stand behind. So that's the third aspect of it, I think, very appealing to buyers. Next. Okay, hand it back. Okay, yeah, here's the W+ standard if you're not familiar with it. What you see on the right is the wheel of what we call the domains. So instead of there being just a generic W+ credit, the credit is assigned due to the domains that are selected. And so these 6 areas we call domains were selected by rural women themselves when we initiated the standard 10 years ago. We spoke with women's groups in Nepal and also in Kenya, and we asked them that question: if we were to measure women's empowerment, what would we be measuring? And they came up with these 6 areas of what they considered important to their own empowerment. WOCON then hired experts in each of these 6 areas to develop the specific methodology and indicators for those 6. So a project developer choosing to use the W+ standard needs to use at least one of these domains, but other ones that are chosen specific to the context of your project. So wherever you feel you're making the most impact, that would be the domain that you would probably select. So as I mentioned, it also, one W+ credit is equivalent to a 10% impact for each woman within the monitoring period. So again, it's similar to carbon. We start with a baseline, and then the monitoring results report is prepared based on what's the change from baseline to the end of that monitoring period. And for every 10% of change. So if you had a cook stove project that was made a 67% increase in women's time saving, for example, you would get 6.7 W+ credits times the number of women that were being benefited from that intervention. And that's mentioned at least 20%. And in many cases, projects are sharing much more than 20% of the revenue. And that goes down to women's organizations who are able to use that money as they see best fit. So this is really not for the project developer to determine that they want to, for example, use the money to subsidize more cook stoves. No, this is for women alone to make their decision on how to use that money. Okay, next. I won't go into this in great detail, but this is just to show you that, again, we built the W+ standard knowing what the VCS looks like and what the gold standard and what other carbon credit systems look like, so that it's familiar to those of you who are already engaging in the development of such projects. So maybe slight differences, but basically it's the same process. We do have a coordinator, W+ coordinator, who's the one checks all the documentation and makes sure that everything is in order and communicates back and forth with the project developers as the process proceeds. The other thing to say about this is, unlike a carbon monitoring process, we don't have a fixed time. It's not due to a 1 year. It doesn't need to be. The project developer themselves determines at the time of the PDD what the scheduling is for the measurement process. Now, to the process, to when you're aligning this with a VCS project, you may want to align that as much as possible, but you don't have to. And I think that's an important distinction that may give project developers a bit of flexibility about applying the W+ standard to their VCS credit products. Yep. Okay, over to you, Nicole.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jeanette, for that overview. I'm going to now talk about some more specific details pertaining to the eligibility criteria for obtaining these W+ labels. So these eligibility criteria are laid out in the guidance document that I mentioned, and that guidance document can be found on the rules and requirements page for the VCS program on the Verra website. So the basic criteria is that any VCS project, including joint VCS and CCB, Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standards projects, any of those that conform with both the VCS program or VCS and CCB program, if that's the case, and with the W+ standard requirements, are eligible to receive W+ labels. So if you're participating in both programs, you're eligible to receive these labels. The one stipulation we have is that if you are requesting W+ labels for your VCUs for a certain verification period, that W+ standard certification must be valid for the entire period, of course. The overlap has to be there. It is possible to have retroactively labeled VCUs as well. Some of these cases might get a little bit more complicated, so the best advice we can give is to work with the registry team to make sure that the type of VCU, or sorry, the type of W+ label, as in the domain type, is the same or is applied differently across past issued VCUs. And the Verra registry will also confirm with the W+ coordinator, again, that the entire verification period for those VCUs is covered by a valid W+ certification. So in summary, eligibility criteria is that any project participating in both programs is eligible as long as the entire verification period is covered by a valid W+ certification, and retroactive labels are also possible in certain cases, but we imagine that the more common scenario will be go forward issuing of W+ labels. Okay, so a little bit more information on how many VCUs are eligible for W+ labels and which types of W+ labels are they eligible for. So the W+ standard has specific rules within its standard for how many of those VCUs may receive a W+ label within a project. Jeanette here can answer any of those more specific questions about those rules that live within the W+ standard. But in general, at a very high level, the available W+ labels depend on the type of project activities or the domain of the activity that the project is implementing. So the 6 labels are knowledge and education, health, leadership, food security, income, assets, and time. Just like those those domains that Jeanette mentioned, that's reflected in the types of W+ labels that you can have issued to your VCUs. So the specific rules that W+ standard has about which VCUs may receive a W+ label are summarized very briefly here. Essentially, there are 2 ways that a project using the W+ standard can generate those labels, and that depends on the number of women beneficiaries in the project area. It can either be 100% or it can be a subset. So 100% might be a coke stoves or biogas projects where almost all of the women or all the women within a project area are benefiting from that activity type. So it would be a 1-to-1 labeling, or 100% are eligible for that W+ domain label of the VCUs, or it might be a subset based on the percentage of the women beneficiaries in the area who are being affected by that project activity. So perhaps it might be about 20% for a different type of project. So now we will talk a little bit more about the process. So what do you have to do in order to obtain a W+ label? So in this new version of the guidance document, we really zoomed out and thought we need to make this a lot more simpler, straightforward, and flexible for projects that want to apply both programs to their projects. And the easiest way to do that, we realized, is that the registration and verification processes continue to be handled independently by each standard. However, you can demonstrate conformance with the W+ standard by having your W+ standard project documentation uploaded to the Verra registry once that's been approved by the W+ coordinator through their independent process. So at VCS program registration, this would apply either to a project that is already registered under the VCS program that's now registering under the W+ program for the first time, or to a project that's not registered under both, but wants to register under both at the same time. You would submit all required VCS program documentation as normal for the normal VCS registration approval process. And then either at the same time or afterwards, depending on when that W+ standard registration is achieved, you can also send along the W+ standard registration project documents to the Verra registry. And then once the Verra registry confirms with the W+ coordinator, these are approved by W+, those can be updated or uploaded to the project page of the project on the Verra registry. The same concept applies at the verification approval stage. So this could apply to projects that are requesting a verification approval at the same time under both programs, under the VCS program and under W+, or it could happen, perhaps the VCS verification has already been approved. Maybe the W+ verification approval happens a little bit later. That's also totally fine. But then you can send your W+ monitoring and results report and verification report to the Verra registry. And again, once the Verra registry confirms with the W+ coordinator that this documentation is all valid and approved by W+, that can also be uploaded to the VCS project page on the Verra registry. And both of these processes are to enable projects to demonstrate that they're registered under both programs or verified under both programs to any buyer or investor who's interested in seeing those additional benefits or activities from their project, so that documentation can there be transparently displayed on their project page on the registry. So that is at the registration and verification stages that I just talked about. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the issuance stage, because the issuance stage for a VCS project is actually where you get labels for the VCUs that are issued. And so requesting labels for VCUs on the Verra registry for W+ is the same process for requesting any label from the Verra registry. So you select the label that you're requesting by selecting it on the additional certifications page of the Verra registry. In this particular case, if the W+ domain label is not the same for the entire verification period, please do contact the registry team for some assistance when making a label request. Whenever there's a different label applied to the same verification period, currently we need a little bit of kind of tailored support from the registry team to assist in making that request. But then once that request is made, the Verra registry will confirm with the W+ coordinator that eligibility criteria that I mentioned, that the W+ certification is valid for the entire period for which those VCUs are being requested. And they will also confirm the quantity and domain type of those VC labels, of the W+ labels that are being requested, to make sure that that aligns with what has also been approved by W+. These next couple of slides are some screenshots of the registry page for those who haven't seen this interface before. What you would do is go and look at the verification summary page of your project, your VCS project. You would find your verification and vintage records there, and then to request labels for that particular record, you would click additional certifications, which is highlighted there in yellow. And then you would see this page where you can then use the drop down to select the W+ label, the relevant W+ label for that subset of VCUs that you're requesting to be issued, and then you would just click submit. So that is all I have for you in terms of the overview of the process. I'm going to hand it back now to Jeanette.
Thanks, Nicole. So you may have seen from the announcement that what we would really like to do at this time is open up a piloting process for well, we're thinking 2 to 3 projects. It could ideally be more. But what we would very much like to do in collaboration with Verra is to find a couple projects that we could, like, you know, use as also our own learning and refinement for this process in terms of tweaking. We're not going to probably tweak the standard, but in terms of making sure this is a smooth integration of these two standard certification systems. That's what we're gaining from the piloting, but we also feel that it's an opportunity for you as project developers who have really exceptional projects where, one thing I forgot to mention is the W+ standard also allows for a 2-year back crediting process. So if you have a project that's already been delivering benefits for women's empowerment for the last 2 years or more, we can go backwards 2 years and give you credit for what you've been able to achieve in those 2 years alongside your carbon credits. We think, we know that there is a clamoring for more information and for potential projects to see exactly what this looks like. And so what we're doing here is saying, let's look for 2 to 3 projects where we can showcase step by step what this looks like and why this is such an attractive opportunity for more project developers to engage in. So we're opening as of today. You'll see down here we've put on the website, there's a very simple template. So if you're at all interested to be considered as one of these pilot projects, you just simply fill out this. It gives us information on your name, the project name, the country that you're operating in, and then allows us to get back in touch with you to talk to you in more details. We would promise that these selected pilot projects would have as much guidance as we can possibly give you from our side for this eligibility. I don't think, I mean, anyone, even if you're not selected for the pilot, you're still going to get this kind of assistance. I think you heard Nicole state from the Verra side as well. But this is really a chance to select a couple projects that really can showcase to the world. And we can do this showcasing through an additional webinar, which we're already talking about doing perhaps later in the year, again with Verra. We can also showcase such a thing through our normal outreach channels from WOCON and W+ and social media. Also, we are at the COPs and we're at New York Climate Week. We're in a lot of different places where we could also talk about these specific projects that look so promising. So please do reach out to us, either through this template or send us an email. And on the last slide here, you'll see the email for us that you could reach out to and let us know you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Okay, I'm just going to wrap us up here with the last slide before we go to our Q&A session. So just to summarize the main takeaways that we hope you get from this webinar, we really encourage you to go and look at the updated guidance document that was released late in June, and have a look at that and see the same thing that we've mentioned today about the eligibility criteria and the process and the steps that you would take in order to receive a W+ label for your VCUs. That guidance document is available on the rules and requirements page for the VCS program on the Verra website. And you can also find the required documentation for the W+ standard by going to the W+ standard website. So now we will open it up for any questions in the chat. So feel free to start sending those over using the Q&A function. I see there's already several in there. And so I'm going to hand it over to Justin to help us moderate and read out loud the questions so that we can answer them.
Great. Thanks, Nicole and Jeanette. So the first question from Chetan is about templates. So when the W+ label was initially launched, there were joint templates. There have been many revisions to the VCS program templates since that initial launch, and we haven't kept up the revisions to the joint templates. And when we evaluated it with this update to the guidance, we decided it wasn't really that value added to have joint templates. So instead, the way we've set it up is you use the standard VCS program templates, but you can submit that same template to W+, so you don't have to repeat any information that's in that template in what goes to W+. And then there's a separate W+ template for any additional information that's required to demonstrate that you meet their certification requirements. So there's not a joint template, but there's a joint recognition of the program templates so that you're not duplicating between the two. And then once W+ confirms that you meet their requirements, you can provide that confirmation back to us to qualify for the VCUs. But Jeanette, do you want to say anything else on the W+ templates, or does that cover it? Covers it? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's good.
And then the second part of that question was, sorry, as project developers, do we need to follow certification cycles separately? So you're welcome to, I think Jeanette covered this in her comments maybe after the question was asked. You can have a separate period for the W+, excuse me, certification if you wish, but you're welcome to align them. If you're requesting the certifications at the same time, it probably makes sense to align the time periods and the cycles. And then that would allow you also to have your same auditor or verifier confirming both sets of documents at the same time, rather than doing those separate. So feel free, and in fact you're encouraged to combine the processes, but there are two different documents for the different programs. Okay, the next one is, with alignment with a VCS project, will it be clear and easy to identify the project periods where the W+ standard was also verified, meaning to make sure older vintages are not incorrectly thought to be inclusive of W+. So the way, this is the reason why we apply labels on VCUs as opposed to on projects, because there could be a period where a project was not assessed under a W+ standard, and then a period where it was assessed. So only the VCUs from the period that has been assessed and certified under W+ will be eligible for the labels. So the VCU tracking is the way that you distinguish between those vintages that are certified versus not. The next question is Kabishanga from New Horizons Women's Education Center. At what level do we bring on SESA or social safeguards? Why is it difficult to get funding from SESA, vulnerability, GESI, ESMF? I'm not familiar with any of those acronyms, so I'll let Jeanette speak to that, but just on safeguards more generally, so any VCS project has to fully meet all VCS program safeguards, which do include social safeguards. So all of that has to be done for all VCS projects, and then that information is obviously also provided over to W+. But Jeanette, I'll let you speak to the more detailed part of that.
I don't know. I don't know all those acronyms as well, but thanks for the question, Kasachanga. In addition to VCS safeguards, the W+ also has its own safeguards. And as I said, because we built the W+ standard on the architecture of a carbon standard, we also have the same model used against safeguards as kind of a green, yellow, red light that says if you have a red light, that's it, stops. If it's yellow, it goes forward with certain changes. And green, of course, we're looking at. And I would add that we have also recently upgraded, I would say, the W+ standard to also look at gender-based violence. So the W+ standard now also requires that the project developer make a statement about if there's been any accusations of any sort of sexual abuses. That has to be stated up front. So we've kind of upgraded that aspect of it. Yeah, why is it hard to get funding? That's a whole nother discussion. This is one of the reasons that we have indicated that the use of the W+ standard requires this 20% benefit sharing, in part to make up for that funding problem. I can't answer those other aspects. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jeanette. The next question is, if a project is currently on the Climate Action Reserve, is there a pathway to a VCU and W+? So the Climate Action Reserve is a approved program under the VCS, so that means there is a process to move projects across, assuming that the methodology is eligible and active under both programs. So the details of that transfer process are in the VCS standard. So then once a project has moved across, then any VCUs that qualify, so if you get the certification under W+, then any VCUs that have been associated with a transferred project would be eligible for the labels. So feel free to email us if you want to follow up on the specifics of the transfer process, but the short answer is yes, there is a process. Anything to add there, Jeanette?
Nothing else to add, yeah.
Okay. Is it possible to further explain, excuse me, sorry, I have a frog in my throat. Is it possible to further explain how gender empowerment will be measured? So that's a question for you, Jeanette.
Juan, thanks for the question. So I think the evidence of this question is exactly points to what I'm saying, is that so many project developers are asking us, what does this look like in very concrete terms? This is not the webinar to talk to you in detail about this. Also, just one quick thing to add. Gender empowerment is not a thing. It's women's empowerment, right? Because you're empowering a person. You can't empower a gender relation, you have to empower a person. And just to state that we are not making claims related to changes in gender equality. We don't believe that a project activity can attribute to such a large goal as a change in gender equality. We are measuring women's empowerment, where we're very comfortable in saying we can attribute a project activity to a change in women's empowerment. So anyway, sorry to say I can't at this webinar give much more detail about that. I would suggest that you look at the website. There's a lot of material there that could hopefully give you some more information about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeanette. I was wondering if the percentage of labeled VCUs could vary over the life cycle of the project. So Jeanette, I think this is for you as well.
Yep. Hi, Nadine. That's a great question. Absolutely. And thanks for the question, Nadine, because it also allows me to say that this is a flexibility for project developers, that you can start out with one domain that you feel comfortable about, and in 2 or 3 monitoring periods down the road, you can add more. You can change the domains you can use. You could change, ideally, yes, the percentage. We would, of course, love to see that every project reaches 100% a 1-to-1. So we use the example of forestry where, for example, just gave a number of 20%. That's just, we made that up. But understanding that, for example, in forestry projects, it may not be the case that 100% of the women of the project area are benefiting from the project. We would love to see that change. So is a project evolving and bringing more and more women and a larger percentage into that equation? Yes, I think that would be such a fantastic success story to see the transgression of how that happens. So yes, I would say it can absolutely change. Monitoring period to monitoring period, that percentage can change. The domains could change. Maybe there's other things that could change as well.
Yeah, and maybe one comment from the VCS program is for grouped projects, they obviously have multiple instances and are adding instances over time. So each instance may have different levels of activities related to the W+ standard, and that would obviously drive a change in the percentage of total VCUs from the project that are qualifying, because you may have some instances that are qualifying and some that are not. Okay, next question. One of the eligibility criteria for issuing carbon credits is that the benefits of the project should be sustainable and non-reversible. how do you make sure fulfilling this criteria in the case of benefits to women? Example for domains of health and food security for women. So from the VCS perspective, when we talk about permanence, we're specifically talking about reversals of carbon stock increases or losses of carbon stocks. So when you see permanence language in the VCS program documents, that's what it's talking about. But certainly the safeguard requirements for VCS projects must be met at validation and at every verification thereafter. But Jeanette, maybe you want to add about potential permanence risks around gender benefits.
It's a good question. We don't talk about permanence, of course, in the same way that VCS does around this. Clearly, if there's backtracking, that'll have to be noted in the monitoring period that this would, those outcomes would no longer be in existence in a second, third subsequent monitoring period. So there would be no credit given for that. I think that's, so far we have not encountered that, but you're right, that could certainly be a case. So, I mean, that's all I can think of at this time, is that the project would not receive those W+ credits.
Great, thanks. And the last question that's up here, feel free to ask more if anyone has further questions, but what is the interest among investors and buyers for W+ projects? Are there better rates for such projects? So Jeanette, you have probably had more conversations with people on the funding and buy side in terms of interest in the labels.
It's a great question, Ruchi. It's a question we get every time. Everybody wants to know, of course. It's been a long 10 years of trying to build the market demand for this. It's innovative. I can tell you confidently that in the last 1 year or 2 years, there has started to be this request from buyers for these gender co-benefits, or and as the ideas I mentioned, and also to say that the W+ has 2 ways to be used. It can be used in relation to generate what we call standalone credits, which have nothing to do with carbon, which is outside of this webinar. So far, the projects that have used it have already been just generating those kind of standalone credits. And so we've been hoping that there would be carbon projects use the W+ standard, but so far we do not yet have any such credits on the shelf to sell. And that's been frustrating for us because we've been hearing, not huge numbers, but we've been hearing some companies and buyers who are asking what's available. And it's been very frustrating to say nothing yet. So there are certain projects in the pipeline. We're hoping to have more through this piloting process, but we have not been able to answer to the buyers that these credits do already exist. So as your question about pricing, and that's another very important question, the price that the standalone credits have sold for so far is been up to $20 a credit. That's without carbon. So we don't know yet what that premium, and that's the key question, what will be the premium price for a credit that has a W+ added to a carbon? We don't know, but we're not going to allow it to be 10 cents or something, because these are, and even buyers understand this, because these are women's lives. This is not a carbon chemical somewhere or something, right? So it's a good question. We are working on this. We will be coming up with the next few months, also with some pricing guidance on that, but we're not there yet.
We look forward to you all letting us know once you do the projects and get extra money, though, so we can tell the good story. Okay, Chetan, the VCS standard requires a positive impact on 3 SDGs. If a project does VCS and W+, does it not also need to comply with this requirement, or will W+ certification allow the project developers to comply with this requirement? So benefits to women is obviously one of the SDGs, so we would recognize any of the certification within that as a contribution towards the SDGs. We could follow up on specifically how that should be reported, but the reporting on the 3 SDGs is relatively high level in the VCS program documents, so there should be an opportunity to make that as streamlined as possible if you're giving a detailed demonstration for the sake of your W+ certification. Nicole, do you want to weigh in on that? You're a bit more familiar with the details of our templates and things.
Your answer is solid. The W+ standard could be used to demonstrate conformance with that SDG requirement. The VCS program template should still be filled out in accordance with all the instructions and all the rules and requirements that we have around demonstrating that you're meeting 3 SDGs for your VCS project. But certainly if one of those SDGs could be met by the W+ project activity, that would be a great opportunity to kind of have alignment there.
Yeah, so you could always reference that supplemental document that's coming from W+. Okay, Ruchi, an offer to speak about influencing investors. That's great. I'm sure Jeanette would love to hear from you about that. Question on the recording. So yes, the recording will be available. So it'll be shared. It goes automatically to anyone who registered, including those who weren't able to attend live. And then it gets posted on the website on the same page as the announcement. So you'll get an email that you can forward on to your colleagues or other contacts. Okay, that's the end of our open questions, and we're getting close to the end of the hour. So maybe I'll just do a quick pause to see if anyone is in the process of typing a question. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time and interest today. You can see the email addresses up on the screen there to contact for further information. And as we said, the webinar recording will be posted. Oh, sorry, one more question. Would this support small companies who would be interested? So yeah, certainly small companies, whether that's on the project developer side or the buy side, are more than welcome to participate, and the pilot may be a good opportunity if you need a little bit of extra support in navigating the documents or things like that. Signing up for the pilot may be a good opportunity to get that support in navigating the system.
Yeah, and also we do often get this question: is there a minimal size of a project that needs to apply the W+ standard? The answer is no. Not at all. And I was just, and nice to see you there, Sunita. Please, I just like to encourage any and all of you who have any interest and have further questions and want to talk to us, just reach out to this email address here that's at the bottom, coordinator@wplus.org. And we're happy to have calls with you, engage with you further, and have more detailed one-on-one kind of discussions on how we could, work together on this. Thank you.
Great.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Justin and Jeanette, for your time today. Thank you to all participants who took the time to come and listen to our presentation. We hope it was really informative. Like Justin said, if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to the emails on the screen. Okay. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.